can see my screen, I will assume. And welcome to our Pedagogy for Peers workshop for February 11th. We are talking transfer alignment. So this is kind of the third in a series of workshops that have been pretty intensely focused on transfer. We're excited today to have some guests with us, which I will tell you about in a little while. As we are getting started, please do put your name, next to your name, please put your institution and your discipline, as well as pronouns and things like that on your picture. And we won't go around and speak to everybody, have everybody speak, because we have a pretty big group. We will be doing some framing of the conversation, and then we will have our panel of guests who will answer some questions and provoke some discussion. And then at about 2:15, we will break out into our discipline discussion groups so that you can have more discipline focused conversation. We want to leave time for that as part of this meeting. So that's what we're going to be doing today. Here is our mighty team at the Center for Student Success. Erica and I are here. Precious, who is the coordinator of My Best, is also part of our team, and we are excited to be supporting this project.
You'll join us on Sunday for Super Bowl ? Okay, my bad.
Someone's just invited us all to their Super Bowl party, so that's fantastic. So yeah, so this is the standard, like, you know, how you engage on Zoom. If you haven't seen this before, then I don't know, you know, what kind of rock you've been hiding under. But anyway, please feel free to use the chat. I know you all know what to do. Raise your hand, and we'll be watching for people to ask questions. We have a lot of partners, and actually we have a growing list of partners in this initiative. That is, we are working with our partners at the Community College Research Center, and I think a couple of people are on the line today. I know at least I saw Sue from CCRC, who is following along with the work that we're doing and going to be producing some research regarding it. Our funder, the Mellon Foundation, and then we've just added a couple of new partners. We're going to be hearing today from Emily Cottrell from NISTS, who is going to do a little bit of framing where we're kind of leaning into the National Institute for the Study of Transfer Students faculty guide, and you're going to hear some about that today from Emily via video. And then we're also partnering with Achieving the Dream to offer a teaching and learning seminar, online virtual seminar, which I know that some of you are enrolled in, and there was the first meeting happened yesterday. So, and I heard the feedback I heard from the facilitators, for those of you who were there, is that you're a great group. So I knew you would be, and I'm really proud. But so our partners list is kind of growing, and that's exciting because, you know, it's nice to have a lot of resources to bring to a project like this. I want to say, before I move on from this slide, I want to say, I know there are people on this meeting for whom this is your first Strengthening My Humanities meeting, and what you're thinking uppermost in your mind is, what is this project all about, and what can you tell me? How can I find out what the deliverables were, and what have you been doing since I have, you know, before I joined? And I'm going to show you where to go for that information, but I'm not going to do a comprehensive project overview because that ends up taking up the whole meeting, and we don't get on, and we never get on to the new stuff. So I'm going to show you where to go for more information about the project, and hopefully that will be helpful to you. And of course, always feel free to reach out to me separately if you want more information. So I talked about Achieving the Dream, this course design redesign seminar. We still have a few seats left in this seminar. It's a 6-week virtual workshop. It started yesterday, so it started this week. It has kind of both asynchronous and synchronous components. All of the people in the cohort are either from communication, English, history, or theater. Some are instructional designers who are focused on courses in that those 4 disciplines, but this is a cohort basically of people participating in this project, and it is open to both community college and bachelor's degree granting institutions. And so there's still more space, and I think Erica has the link that she's going to drop into the chat if you want to register. It is not too late, but do register soon so you can join and start joining the conversation. Reminder of our Michigan Transfer Network and I know you've all received, for some of you it's confusing, but hopefully I've clarified your problem about using the Michigan Transfer Network and how we're using that in this project, which is that as you select as in your discipline, the courses that you want to focus on aligning to improve transferability, we're going to use our Michigan Transfer Network document repository to share syllabi. So if you're part of this project and you want to upload syllabi, many of you have already received some your login credentials for MTN, and all you are going to be able to do is upload or look at syllabi from the doc repository. If you have not gotten those credentials, just reach out to me and I will make sure that you get them. And this will give you an opportunity also to kind of explore what kind of equivalencies are already out there for the courses that you're looking at. So how the transferability is working so far. Okay, and then, oops, checking the chat. Okay, here we go. So we are here today on February 11th, and we do have dates. So please mark your calendars for March 18th and April 29th for the rest of the virtual workshops that will happen in this semester. On March 18th, we're going to actually feature some of the facilitators and hopefully participants from the Teaching and Learning seminar. So as they talk about how they have been unpacking innovative instruction over the 6 weeks of that experience. And then on the 29th, we're excited because we will see some of the quantitative research findings from our partners at CCRC. So mark your calendars, and I don't have the Zoom set up yet, but you will find them on the MCCA events page as soon as I get them built, and then also on our My Humanities Padlet, which I think you're going to see in the next slide. No, first we have to talk about Level Up. We're in the middle of, actually, yeah, we're about in the middle of our 2-month campaign to surface questions of equity, equity gaps, how to level up basically our engagement with equity across all of our projects here at the Center for Student Success. So this is something that we kind of committed to as a staff, that we would start 2022 with this, and we are inviting you all to go along with us on this journey. So every 2 weeks, we are introducing a new focus. We've so far talked about self-aware and self-care, authenticity in advocacy, and then next week we're going to drop some more equity-focused articles on LinkedIn, tweets, posts, graphics. We're using sessions that we recorded in the past that were focused on equity, so you can, video clips, things like that. So watch our LinkedIn and Twitter page, and feel free to join in to this conversation. And I know some of you have already, and we're happy to see as many of you as would like to be part of this, continuing to level up with us through the middle of March. And when we started talking about this project, actually way back late last fall, one of the things I said that I liked the best about it is that when it was over, it would be March. So that's getting closer. We're getting closer to the end of the Michigan winter. And if you love the Michigan winter, that's great. And I wish for you to have as much as you want, and then please step out of the way and let spring come. So we keep, if you're wondering, this is when here, if you're just joining us or if you've been with us, this is our Padlet board. This is where we are archiving just about everything about this project. So I'm trying to keep it up to date by removing things that have already happened. I will be, going back through after today, loading up new stuff, taking down, moving old stuff to the archive column. But you can find things that we've done, all of the meetings that we've had, the slide decks, the recordings, if they exist. I am recording, right? Yep, good. Slides, files, anything like that, you'll find on this Padlet board. So you can kind of review the project from the beginning. You can share things that you find. So you see like some of these things in the buzz sections for each discipline. You can make connections with each other, and you can find registration links for upcoming events also on the Padlet board. So the Padlet board is your friend if you want to know more about this project. There should be pretty much everything that we've done is here. So it's getting very big, which is great because that means that we've actually been doing a lot. But please, it's free to if you don't have a Padlet account, it's free. And very worthwhile, actually. We're having a lot of fun with Padlet here at the Center for Student Success. Okay, before I introduce Emily via video. Are there any questions or anything that I need to address? Thank you, Erica, for including all of the links. So we got started before Katie left. She's very involved with the National Institute for the Study of Transfer Students and was helping to plan their conference. And she suggested that we take a look at the NIST's faculty guide for transfer, which is basically focused on 5 key practices that everybody can do to better support transfer students. So we decided to kind of frame this meeting around the NIST guide and invited Emily, who was not able to be with us in person, but she made this short video to help to introduce the guide and talk a little bit about what they're thinking about transfer at NISTs. So I am going to, this is the big, this is the triple axle of the meeting, where I stop sharing this and I bring up the video. So wish me luck. Okay, so now I need to. Okay, here's the video. Now I go back to the meeting. Okay. Make sure I'm sharing my sound. And we're off.
My name is Emily Cottrell, and I'm an assistant director at NISTS, the National Institute for the Study of Transfer Students. Our mission at NISTS is to empower professionals, faculty, and administrators to be transfer champions who challenge the status quo to improve the transfer student experience. I'm glad to be with you today to talk about one of our recent publications, Supporting Transfer Student Success, 5 Key Faculty Practices. It's easy to see how many times a document has been downloaded from your website, but it's a lot harder to know if it's truly helping folks approach their work a little differently. That's why I couldn't have been more pleased when the folks at NCCA scheduled this meeting, because it seems to me that you're using the guide for its exact intended purpose, to open the door to meaningful reflection and conversation about the concrete ways we can foster better transfer outcomes from within the classroom. When people ask me how the guide came about, I have to chuckle a little bit because it was a mix of good old happenstance and goodwill that brought my co-authors and I together. To understand why, you need to know that my primary role at NISTS is to organize the delivery and assessment of all our annual conference content. Our event is maybe a little different than what you're used to, because instead of focusing on just one department, we invite professionals from all levels and functional areas of both 2- and 4-year institutions and state systems to join us. That means frontline staff, mid-level managers, faculty, researchers, and administrators from student and academic affairs all come together to shape the transfer experience. One of the questions we always ask on our conference evaluation is, what would you like to learn more about? Without fail, one of the most popular responses we get is how to get faculty more involved. The truth is there are folks in admissions, advising, enrollment, orientation, transfer centers, and more who are dedicated to smoothing the transition between institutions. Yet there is simply no denying that the classroom remains a pivotal and sustained point of contact with students both before and after they transfer. And that means we cannot make transfer better without faculty input and support. But how do you recruit faculty transfer advocates? What data and messages do they need to hear, and what exactly do we want them to do? Well, that's where this guide comes in. In my journey to find the information folks were asking for, I searched and researched the transfer literature and other organizations' offerings, looking for something that might provide some straightforward, practical advice. But I kept coming up empty. So one day, I drummed up my courage and essentially cold called, or cold emailed, I guess, 2 prominent scholars whose work seemed to have a lot of overlap, Dr. Julie Wang and Dr. Peter Felton. I don't remember exactly what I wrote, but it went something like, "Hello there, I'm a huge fan of your research. It seems to align with some other stuff I'm reading. Do you want to collaborate on a new publication for faculty?" I'm still a little shocked they said yes, particularly because this was in the spring of 2020. But I think it was the universe's way of telling us that this thing needed to be written. Looking back, I can honestly say that working with Julie and Peter, and later our colleagues Lance Gooden and John Iuzzini, was one of the most enjoyable professional experiences I've ever had. We brainstormed lots of possible practices, and in fact, an early draft of practice number 5 was heavily weighted toward curriculum alignment efforts. On that, the literature is clear. It's critically important we work within and between our institutions to ensure that transfer intending students can take classes that will count towards their degree in the right order and when they need them. We ultimately decided that diving into that topic wasn't the right fit for the type of introductory piece we were aiming for. So I deeply appreciate that you're using the guide to set the context for today's discussion. But I'd like to make sure this is on your radar too. One thing that never wavered throughout our planning was our commitment to helping readers see what we know now, but perhaps didn't always realize when we were first learning about transfer. That it is unequivocally an equity issue. Not enough students who want to transfer are able to do so successfully, and the challenges and barriers they face disproportionately impact low income and students of color. Side note, if you're not familiar with the history of transfer, I encourage you to read Chapter 1 of this excellent book, The Transfer Experience. In it, Stephen Handel, who's one of our advisory board members, expertly explains how community colleges were set up to be catch-alls for the students that universities didn't want to admit. Spoiler alert, worked a little too well, and so we're still dealing with all the ripple effects. If you're here today, then you probably already know this. The transfer pathway doesn't always deliver on its promise to help students achieve their academic goals and improve their prospects for social mobility. For many, and through no fault of their own, transfer policies and processes are unclear and too often result in an expensive and unnecessary accumulation of transfer credits. So when we say the transfer is an equity issue, we mean equity of access to clear transfer pathways in general, but also access to transfer-specific supports and information, funding and scholarships, and high-impact practices and programs, all of which can help transfer students maintain momentum towards their degree. We're lucky that transfer has been a hot topic for the past few years, so many of these inequities are slowly coming to light. But it takes time and broad culture change to overcome decades of systemic exclusion, and that's where you come in. Whether you've already thought about it or not, your work today will lay or perhaps build upon the essential groundwork for creating degree maps that provide truly equitable access to your programs. I'm so excited for you to hear from today's panelists as they discuss our 5 key practices. So I'll stop myself there and let you get to it. Talking about transfer is our favorite thing to do at NISTS, and we hope you'll join us to continue the conversation. One opportunity we have in about a week is the virtual component of this year's annual conference. It's not too late to register, and for just $150, you'll get access to all the concurrent sessions and networking opportunities on the virtual schedule, plus all the handouts and recordings from last week's event in St. Louis. If you'd like more information, you can visit the conference website at www.nists.org/conference. Thank you for your time today and your ongoing contributions to transfer student success. They can't do it without you, and neither can we. Take good care of yourselves and enjoy today's workshop. Hope to see you again soon. Bye-bye.
Hang on, bringing back the PowerPoint. If anybody has any questions for Emily, although she could not be here today, as you can see, she was very interested in our project, and I'm sure would be happy to entertain any questions that anyone has. Hopefully you are all able to see from this how the work that they have done in preparing this faculty guide overlaps and has the potential to significantly support the work that we've been trying to do at with our Strengthening My Humanities project. So on that note, when we were putting together this panel conversation, we reached out to our partners at MEC, and we framed some questions around the 5 practices that you see here on the screen. So you'll see kind of how the questions that the panelists are going to discuss will correspond to these practices in the NIST faculty guide. I think you'll see those parallels there. So today we are fortunate to have 5 panelists with us, and as I said, we reached out to our friends at MEC, the Michigan Higher Education Compact, because we wanted to find states who were nearby, and of course no state is exactly like Michigan, but at least kind of these are all Midwestern states. So we have guests with us from Wisconsin, Ohio, and Indiana to talk about how transfer works within their systems, and they are similar to us in that they have loose systems, but different from us in that they have systems. So they're, you can take it both ways, but we're hoping that you'll find some commonalities and what we found when we were preparing this conversation is, faculty to faculty conversation takes similar shape, whether you're doing this from within a more structured system or a looser confederation, such as we have here in our project. So I'm going to turn it over to Miranda, Sarah, Allison, TJ, and Joel, and start with a question related to practice number 1, which is to confront false assumptions and deficit thinking. So what false narratives about transfer students have you heard or do you hear that impact your relationships with your partner colleges, and what impacts transfer student success? And I will just invite our panelists to unmute themselves. And when you're speaking for the first time, say who you are and where you're from, so we know who's speaking.
Well, hi, I'm TJ Rivard, and I'm from Indiana University East. I'm the Associate Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs here. And I was in my former life, about a few years ago, I was Assistant Vice President for the University Transfer Office for Indiana, University, and then also worked on the statewide General Education Corps, which was a statewide, as the name implies, statewide effort to get learning outcomes as the primary operating procedure for transferring courses from one state institution to the next. So, I mean, the false narrative, and many of you probably have heard this or have that I heard often, was that our community college is not as good, and the students aren't as don't work as hard or aren't as what do I want to say, as prepared as students who come to the regional campuses or to the research campuses. And that was true also with it's scaffolded, right? Because so the regional campuses students weren't as prepared for the research campuses and so on. In fact, one of the things that first happened when Ivy Tech Community College, which is our big community college here in Indiana, they were a vocational school, and then they were made a community college. And when they were made a community college, and this is many years ago now, but when they were made a community college, there was a state law that was put in place that we would accept, we being the 4 years, would accept transfer from the community colleges. At that particular time, it was easier to go to Ivy Tech and transfer to Indiana University Bloomington, the Research One University, which is part of my my university, than it was from the regional campuses, Indiana University East, for example, where I teach, to go to Bloomington, because Bloomington did not accept credit from the regional campuses. So there was a lot of transfer issues that kind of developed out of this prejudice that students on these other campuses, smaller campuses, just simply weren't as good or weren't as prepared or ready for college. Now, a lot of that has been smoothed out, but I think that's the big one that I hear. And I don't want to take up too much time, so I'd like to allow Miranda to jump in.
I think from the tech, first of all, my name is Miranda Hawk, and I am with Madison College. I'm hoping I don't have a lag. I'm having some internet issues today, but the false narratives, it is exactly what TJ was talking about. And from the technical college point of view, from somebody who works with students and four-year partners, being at a two-year college myself, it's a challenge, especially because, one, we know different, but getting that message out, that difference, and that's addressing another question later on down the line. But another false narrative that I have found is that they're not prepared for a four-year experience because a two-year experience is so different. And that has been a challenging false narrative to address with four-year partners, that the two-year student may not be as prepared for the rigor. And it may be discipline specific, because in theater, the rigor is, the students are expected to do rehearsals in addition to the traditional classes, and extra, core hours in their program of transfer. So not just prepared for academically, but for the physical and time commitment.
Thanks, Miranda. Anybody else have a response to this false narrative question? And also, people can feel free to either add their thoughts in the chat, or raise your hand, or unmute yourself and speak. A little bit. And other thoughts on this false narrative?
I'm Allison Todd. I'm the Dean of Arts and Sciences at Columbus State, and I do have a little tidbit to share about this, because in this regard, I had great respect for The Ohio State University, who is our main transfer partner in Columbus, Ohio. They were very interested in strengthening their partnership with us, but one of the things that they quickly recognized was these false narratives that pervaded the institution. So they bravely began to collect data on specifically students from Columbus State. And then they formed a rather interactive set of seminars with presentation of data. And it was amazing how many of the faculty had to do an about face. And they were willing to do it, which was particularly heartwarming, because they showed the percentage of success among our students. They indicated how many different majors they had done well in, the completion rate. And the best part was at the very end, they then introduced full-time faculty from OSU who started at Columbus State. So many people who had us in their background that, you know, went on to get Ivy League schools for that matter and get degrees and come back to OSU. The other faculty were surprised to hear about that. So I thought that was a great tidbit, and I would encourage any of the colleges and universities to think about doing something like that as well.
That's an excellent suggestion. Any other
I think it's not, oops.
Go ahead, Stephen.
I was gonna say, I think it's not an uncommon experience where we at community colleges, when students come from university, they are shocked at the rigor of our classes, and many of them have not been prepared at university for the rigor of our community college classes, which are often because professors can work so closely with them. But that I hear that over and over again from students who come and want to slum at the community college, especially in spring and summer.
Thanks, Stephen. Any other thoughts on this question before we move on to question 2? Oh, I see a chat. All right, TJ has added something in the chat. Check that out. About the persistence of community college students at four-year institutions. So let's take a look at question 2, and this kind of dovetailing into this is knowing who your transfer students are. So what kind of data helps with your decision-making about transfer and articulation as you're working with your transfer partners? What kind of data are you using? Or if you are not using data, or you wish you could use data, what kind would you use? I know that's not a strain. That's a response that I would hear from some of our community college folks. Is we wish we had the data that we needed.
I think, well, I was considering this question a lot as we were planning for this discussion. And, you know, some of the data points have been talked about already, but one of the things that I have found the absolute most helpful in addressing finding out who the transfer students are is truly getting the programs to partner with the 4 years in a way that the students in our school population get a better awareness of the opportunities available to them in a transfer program. In the theater area, and not necessarily in speech and communications, where I am also an instructor, but in the theater area, overseeing those students, often we tend to attract students who don't necessarily know where else they fit. So they're not necessarily sure, and some of them, most of them haven't even thought about the transfer, or they aren't considering the transfer as an option. But it has been really exciting in bringing 4 years in an untraditional way, or partnering with 4 years. And we are down the street from UW-Madison, but we partner with Whitewater, which is 45 minutes away, Stevens Point, which is an hour and a half, Platteville, which is about 45 minutes to an hour to our south. So I try to introduce the students and our student body to opportunities that are open to them because of our relationship, our close relationship with the four-year partners. And then they start seeing themselves, and then there's almost a self-identifying process. I know the data discussion is truly the point of this question, so I will back off of this, but it is that personal relationship and becoming actively involved in associations or partnerships with the 4 years in your area that really can help students see themselves past a technical college experience as well.
And you're describing actually a kind of qualitative data that I think is really important in this conversation. It's not just, how many students transfer, how many students succeed, but what is it about the experience that makes a student successful versus, what might be missing if a student does not make that successful leap. I see Mercelada has raised her hand. Can I call on you for a sec, Mercelada?
Hi, yeah, so I don't know exactly what kind of data, but you just said something that I was going to mention, like qualitative data. Because I teach at a community college, and I feel that a balance between, just quantitative information, but qualitative data helps us see the whole person and whole real people choices. So that would be one thing. And I'm sorry, I can't say specifically what kind of qualitative data, but also maybe this is already out there, but data on reverse transfer, like knowing. I teach a gateway course, and one of the things I try to find out about my students is like, where have you gone to school? Like all of the places before here at GRCC. And so there's a lot of fluidity. I know the focus tends to be on like from community college to four-year schools, but people go back and forth, and I don't know where that information is, but I feel like it would be helpful.
Mm-hmm. That information on swirling students what we used to call swirlers. It's kind of a yucky term, but yeah, there have been some studies on that. And there are ways to kind of get at that data. Other kinds of data, like from any of our panelists who actually are using some quantitative data or working with any of those kind of numbers type studies, what has been helpful to you?
I will just talk about two examples. My name is Sarah Johnson, and I am from Madison College. I'm in the English department. So one of the things that I think helps, and again, when we're talking about quantitative data in relation to these specific agreements, articulation agreements, I think being able to specify. We have pre-majors at our institution, and so if we talk about folks who are transferring directly into the School of Ed or directly into the School of Business, or if they are going to be in LAT or the liberal arts and sciences, and then go on to the other schools. So thinking, tracking those students who have a plan, who develop a plan at the two-year school, and then can follow through. That's important data. Mercelada, you talked about reverse transfer, I think in one way, and I hadn't heard the term swirling students either. That's just kind of awful. But one of the things that I know that we track at Madison College is reverse transfer, having to do with students who transfer before they get their degree, their associate's degree, but then we make sure that they get their associate's degree once they've gotten enough credits and the right credits at their transfer institution. And then that way, I mean, the whole point is that we are really tracking what those students are doing at their transfer institution, whether it's Madison or Whitewater or Platteville or wherever, as Miranda was saying. But that then they get that credential before they have to worry about the bachelor's degree, and getting that credential is an important step no matter what. And it's good for obviously all the institutions.
Thanks, Sarah. And thanks, Erica, for dropping the link in the chat to the My School data where we do track some transfer information in Michigan. Any other data that you guys are using? I will mention one of the things, and I've been talking a little bit about that with Eric from MID, who's on this call, I know, and it's representing English. One of the tools that we have available in Michigan that we did not have a few years ago is within this My Transfer network where you're uploading your syllabi. We also have the capability of searching course equivalencies and creating actually matrices that show whether the course is transferring with course-to-course equivalency between various institutions in the state. So that's a piece of quantitative data that we have available. I don't know if any of you in other states are using data like that. We're pretty proud of it, having developed it within the last few years. Other people have probably been doing it for 15, 20 years, but we do have that now in Michigan, and we are able to do some of that work. Any final thoughts on data? Or well, shall we move to question 3? All right, we're going to go to question 3. Offer relentless welcome. That is practice number 3 from the NIST guide. So how can, if your students who transferred don't feel like they belong at the institution they transferred to, or if you, as the sending institution, as the community college, how do you welcome students into, one of the things we've talked a lot about in this project is creating these pathways in humanities programs without, in many cases at the community college, having a strong sense of program. But how can we think about how we can make our students feel welcome, not, at our institutions and within the program that they've selected?
Yeah, I can talk about this for just a moment. And I like how the NIST guide approaches this as a practice, because of course their audience is mostly 4-year accepting transfer students, so talking about how to reduce what they call transfer shock when students who end up at a school because they haven't been intensively prepared like the freshmen incoming students. Our students, when they transfer, are dumped into junior and senior level classes often, and that's sometimes where this relentless welcome is most necessary. So I think it sounds like many of us here are teaching at the 2-year colleges, and I think that this is still relevant to us because we still need to offer this relentless welcome, which has to do with the idea of thinking about making our classrooms places of welcome. And what I like to talk to my peer tutors, when I train my peer tutors, we use a term that's actually from therapy, from psychology, called unconditional positive regard. I don't know, those you psych people probably already know what it is, but it's from Carl Rogers, and it's the idea that we are interacting with students as individuals, always operating under the assumption that they have the internal resources required for personal growth. So it's this idea. So unconditional positive regard doesn't mean that you're never saying anything challenging, that you never say, that you're not, holding the bar high or anything like that. It has much more to do with the idea that you belong here and you are capable of doing this work. It might take some, some fighting, and it might take some some clawing and digging, but I am here to help you, and you absolutely belong here in this classroom with the rest of these students, and you have a lot to offer. I think it's important, again, with this idea of relentless welcome. It's less systemic than some of the other practices that it talks about, right? That as faculty, you know, systems are important, but the experience of students happens almost entirely inside the classroom. And so how we talk to our students, how we build community in our classrooms is central to student success. The other thing that I think is important when we think about this idea of relentless welcome is that we also, I think, front load preparation. So when I say that, I mean, especially thinking about those students of ours who are about to transfer, helping them know some of the things they might expect in terms of knowing how to use their learning resources, their writing center, the tutoring services, knowing how to take advantage of office hours, and the kinds of self-advocacy that I think we don't always take for granted, but I think sometimes at four-year schools they do. There is much less, I'm not saying none, but there is much less of the, I think, entitlement and assumed self-advocacy that many of our colleagues at four-year schools expect from their juniors and seniors, right? And so I think as two-year faculty, we need to make sure that we are helping scaffold those skills through that welcome.
Thanks, Sarah. That's so important. Other observations, thoughts on this idea of relentless welcome?
I think in terms of our terminology, it would be helpful also to recognize that we usually assume students know what we're talking about. And in fact, whether they're a transfer student or not, I mean, I'm going to open this up to just the broad body, the student body itself. They don't often understand what we take for granted. And the best example I can think of, which remains with me, was when I was still teaching. And the statement I had on my syllabus about withdraw. And, you know, there is a process, and, you know, you can imagine what I wrote. Well, you know, a student received an F who remained on my roster, but had dropped out, so to speak. I hadn't seen that person. Well, then came the complaint back that the student was expressing that he had in fact withdrawn from my class. And so why would he get a letter grade? So of course I immediately, you know, get the registrar's office. Let's get this kid's record. What have I done? Maybe, you know, I missed the fact he was there. Well, no, he had physically withdrawn. So that's what he did. So not recognizing that, yeah, but there's another step connected with that. You got to make it official. that of course it hadn't occurred to me that I needed to say that. So that's just one example, and I'm thinking that especially for our students who are used to small classes, who are used to people knowing their names, who are used to certain terms that we use because they're endemic to our campus, then take that with them and expect it to mean the same thing anywhere else. And I think that's why I'm drawn to that phrase, relentless welcome, because we really want to pursue these kinds of things and make it better for our students so that they don't feel as if they're in some foreign country and they don't know the lingo. So that's my suggestion.
I love your example, Allison, because I think I've been looking at documents, revising student-facing documents a lot the last 2 years. And I, especially with the transition to COVID and moving to even more text-based communication, I just kept saying everything's about students, not to students. Everything we're writing is about students. It's not to students. And in the college I just left, we went through the process in the last year. We've just been revising almost every single document, like credit for prior learning, everything, so that students know what CLEP is. So we can't start something with how to sign up for CLEP. We have to start something with, are you getting credit for everything you know, right? Like we have to start it out differently. And then I also like the idea, the term relentless welcome. I've been noodling with another concept in my own head, which is, we talk about microaggressions, and I've been thinking about like micro progressions, because I feel like this happens at every single opportunity we interface with students. We have a rhetorical situation that we can navigate. So are our admissions materials available in all of the languages that our students are most likely to speak and write when they enroll? Do our signs, our welcome signs, any signs we have up in our writing centers or on our office walls, are we representing multiple languages? Are we, like, do students see themselves in the physical and textual environment around us? Do you know what I mean? So I think that's really important. And then, one thing that my colleague Steve does that I'm really, really impressed by, and was actually trying to do something like this at Macomb, and I didn't get to it before I left, but and I don't mean to speak for you, Steve, but Steve has set up in his whole office bay I don't know, like, it's a little free library, but it's a food pantry. It's so you don't have to go to a separate place. Like if you need a granola bar before class because you haven't had a chance to eat because you went to work and then childcare and then school, Steve has set that up, which I've just been really, really impressed by. And I didn't mean to speak for you, Steve, but I just think that's such a great example.
Speak for me anytime you want, Brett, when you're saying good things. Let me just add, we also, what I think is very important is that there's a box with feminine hygiene products in the little free library area. We have office supplies, we have condoms, we have a microwave. So there are things, again, I just especially want to get out the idea that feminine hygiene products are really important.
Great stuff. I love this conversation and how it's drawing connections to our work at our My Best work at MCSS, the non-traditional financial aid and student financial stability work. I mean, it just kind of highlights for me how all of these things work together and how we can be having a geeky conversation about transfer curriculum, and yet we're also having a conversation about basic student support. Any other thoughts on relentless welcome? We got 2 more panel questions, so I'm gonna, unless somebody has something burning they want to say, I'm gonna move ahead to practice number 4, which is how do you build connections across the institution and across institutions? So if, when you're working with your partners, it's really important. So what kind of examples can we talk about how to build, foster, and maintain good working relationships with partner faculty or other personnel across institutions, across the sectors, and then also, within your own institution, how have you worked across the silos to improve connections that will support students or learners, as it may be, to make more successful transitions.
So one of the things that struck me about this question when I read it was that it almost struck me as funny, because there's a sense here, at least in the past, and I've been in higher ed now for over 30 some years. And there was the answer to this question is, well, you don't. You don't. You just bring the credit in, transfer it the way you want to transfer it in, and then you don't talk about it. And it wasn't until, well, for us in the state of Indiana, it wasn't until, I guess it's now been about 10 years, when the state said to us, to all the state institutions said, we need to have, at first they said, we need to have a common set of courses. And fortunately, our Indiana Commission for Higher Education, which happens to be pretty good, said, maybe courses is not the right way to go. Maybe we should think about competencies as opposed to courses. And we thank them profusely for that. But then it became that scary part that was go back to question one. It became that scary part of, it's like, well, but we already have this bias that community colleges aren't as good as the regional campuses. The regional campuses aren't as good as the R1s. And so once we get all these people together and start talking about it, it's just going to be an ugly conversation. And what we discovered is that for the most part, it wasn't. And I think I heard someone say earlier, it's like, sometimes we don't realize how hard people work at every level. And and the focus they have is on the students. And for me, in my career, I have known very, very, very few faculty, no matter where they taught, where the focus wasn't on the students and what they were doing and trying to help them become successful. And so when we began to talk about competencies, it became fairly clear fairly fast that because, well, I should probably back up a little bit. So the logistics of this was that, we broke up the competencies into 6 different areas: foundational skills and distribution areas. And then we brought faculty together around each of those areas, each of the foundational skills, each of the distribution areas from around the state, from all the different public universities, and representative from one from each campus, and said, we need to figure out what these competencies are. When we began that process, we began it by talking about the students. What do we want for the students? What do we expect from the students? What's going to help them become successful when they transfer? And I won't say the competencies are perfectly written, but we did get to a point where we were able to agree on all of them across all of these different areas. And it didn't take as long as we thought it would. Because yes, there were some disagreements, of course, and there were some, people wrangled over language because we're academics and that's what we do. But it was really kind of that sense of, number one, if we focus on the students, and number two, if we focus on the learning, then developing a harmonious conversation among our partners was not as difficult as one would have thought. And we continue that conversation, or at least we have. It's kind of fallen off a little bit, which I regret. But we have. I mean, we have, for example, the writing folks from around the state used to have. I don't know if they still do or not. I don't think they do anymore. But they used to have an annual conference where all the campuses, where all the writing instructors from all the campuses in the state were invited to come, and there was a speaker and the concurrent sessions and that kind of thing. And they got an opportunity to talk to one another about what their challenges were. And the interesting thing, of course, is that the challenges were the same, whether they were at the community college or whether they were at the R1. They were the same, So solving those problems became a joint effort, as opposed to, well, we don't have that problem because we in fact do have that problem. So I think that communication, in a word, I think that communication and making sure you keep communication lines open, and we keep communication lines open with our partners and across campus too. We're having this conversation on our own campus in terms of general education, and we're trying to revamp general education on our campus. And of course, the different schools have different ideas about what students should be focused on in that general education core, even on our own campus. So, and again, I would argue that communication is the core, and keeping students front and center. You know, it's like, what's going to be best for the students and what's going to be best for their success. And it's not about, you know, how do we weed out people, because that's what general education used to do in some ways. So in any case, I think that, oh, and one last thing I would say is giving students a little bit of agency in this process, because they know sometimes more about what they know than we do. So, you know, then that brings up perhaps another part of this equation, which has to do with prior learning assessment and whatnot. So I don't want to go down that road, but I do think that there's a certain agency that students, especially on our campus, and I'm sure on many of your campuses, we have a lot of older students who have done a lot of things. And so, you know, that's part of the equation too. And I'll stop there.
Thanks, TJ.
I think another idea that is so simple, and it's almost embarrassing to mention it, but it is so valuable and it does go so far, is developing those relationships if possible. And I know it takes a lot of time and I know it takes a lot of energy, but if there's professional organizations that you belong to and that you can make those connections. I know with the American College Theater Festival, I'm working with colleagues around my state, but also around my region on a regular basis. And so I'm able to reach out to, I'm getting to know their programs and what it is that they need as well. And again, I'm a smaller department. It's easier for me to work with the students and identify, you know, what is the strength of one institution and if that student has that particular interest. But in that relationship, it also shows what you do, because there's so many assumptions about two-year institutions. And I'm gonna say that especially theater, you know, theater can be considered, if it's not at a four-year institution, it's like, well, you're just an extension of high school. And we have had an opportunity to, I'm lagging again, so I'm going to turn off my camera, but we have had an opportunity to show off some of the things and facilities and the training.
Uh-oh, I think we lost Miranda. Hopefully
Oh,
she
shoot.
can get back to us.
Well,
Darn.
I'll just jump in super quick because, and Miranda, obviously, if you can unmute, you can jump in too, because Miranda's program where they host the theater festival, I think is a great opportunity. And similarly, I think many of you can do these kinds of things where, like we have a Madison Area Writing Center Consortium, and honestly, it's Madison area just because a lot of times UW-Madison hosts it, but we've hosted it at our college, you know, but in Milwaukee and all in, you know, basically southern Wisconsin, northern Illinois. And it's a chance for 2-year, 4-year people to just build relationships. And in doing that, you know, you always have then contacts as you are making negotiations about articulation agreements and things like that.
Thank you. And thank you, Stephen, for putting the information about the LAND conference next week, free virtual conference. A great opportunity to make connections across the sectors and specifically focused on the liberal arts. So really relevant to our project. Thanks for dropping that in. We have one more panel question before we move to our discipline discussion. So I'm going to go ahead and move us there. And that is talking about specifically articulation conversations, in, you know, learning outcomes alignment, actual transferability, really kind of building those pathways. And how are you working across your partner institutions to make those articulation agreements actionable?
I knew I was going to talk about this one. Was there somebody else too? I don't want to jump in before. All right, I'll start, and then if
Take it away.
Okay, great, sounds good. So I'm thinking about, we've been talking a lot. You've been hearing us talk a lot about communication, and of course that is that's important. And I wanted to talk about it sort of in two different ways. So first, I want to talk about internal communication within the institution, and I think also within the department, because if you are working in a large department, and those of us in English, we're generally one of the largest departments on campus. It's important, once you have articulation agreements, to make sure that the things you're doing across the department are recognizable from class to class to class. And so, thinking about within a department, aligning expectations. In our department, we have outcomes-based course descriptions. But we also have what we call non-negotiable skills, so that everybody who is, everybody who's teaching English 1 knows that you've got these large outcomes, but there are also these, 3 or 4 discrete skills that we count on you making sure you're covering in class. We have a grading scale that we agree upon. We have a number of pages of polished prose, we call it. Just so that, again, there's coherence across the sequence. And then that way, once you have your own house in order, it becomes much easier to go to your partner institutions and say, here are the things you can count on from our students. It's not just somebody's syllabus. It's, here are the things that you can count on everybody doing. And I do want to make it very, very clear. We absolutely are not saying, here is the curriculum you must use. We are very much, open to academic freedom. The ways that you want to approach your outcomes are up to you. But we also do a lot of peer observation within our department as well. It's always very friendly. It's never punitive, but we're visiting each other's classes. It was actually kind of interesting during when we were mostly online, because you could just pop in and observe somebody teaching, and it was great. So just this idea of sort of internal alignment. And then when it comes to these conversations, once you have built maybe these professional relationships with somebody at your partner institution, so okay, if I'm going to talk to somebody in Indianapolis, this is the person I'm going to talk to. If I'm going to talk to somebody in Bloomington, this is the person I'm going to talk to. So once you have those relationships, then you can start to really look at these outcome statements and compare and say, okay, here's where we need to be in order to have this agreement firmed up. And then sometimes you bring in deans, provosts, but I find that a lot of the most productive conversations are happening on the faculty to faculty level. That if you can get the faculty who are teaching and who are the course coordinators of these classes you're trying to get articulations with, that then they can talk to their deans and provosts to get the official agreements going.
Thanks, Sarah. Anybody else have thoughts about articulation agreements?
The only thing I would offer is everything that Sarah said, but do it repeatedly. In the sense of, reaching out to those partners on a regular basis and using similar language that they understand, that they're using as well. Because if the subject of your email or the body of your relentless partnership, I love that.
That's good.
That is good. That is really good. But using the same language and continuing to go back and foster those relationships, but touching base and reminding them of your students.
And the last thing I'll just throw out here, since we're talking about communication, and you ask, is it working, right? Working to improve systems. I know this is something that happens a lot in Wisconsin. And I don't know as much about the systems in Michigan, but I know it happens in Illinois as well. I don't think we have anybody from Illinois on the call, but part of the problem is that different partner schools have different articulation agreements. And so it's difficult when our students aren't positive where they're going to transfer to make sure that they're taking the classes that that will articulate correctly. And so I think, talking about, is it working? How do we improve the systems and communication? Letting students know that where they transfer depends on the classes they need to be taking, what kinds of things are gonna transfer.
Thank you, Sarah. Allison has her hand up.
Yeah, I thank you for that. And I just want to push the conversation just a little bit more, because every time I hear the word articulation, I used to shudder. I've gotten over that, but most of the time, we go into a room, we sign away the document, and we think, and that's that, we've done it. And and either, and may it rest in peace, because we're never going to update it. We'll start with that. But then moving on, that there are, let's be honest, there are times when institutions either way, so I'm including community colleges in this, we change things. And then we forget that the change isn't in the articulation agreement, or worse, we don't tell anybody that we changed. And then and guess who suffers? It's a student in the end, because then when we find out about it, they didn't get the credit that they should have. Or, oh, we're not going to really transfer that as it is at your institution. We're going to make it a general elective instead of something that's not toward the degree. And that's why I say there's a whole lot more to articulation than, finally getting it on paper and signing it away. And I'll just add this one last point. It wasn't until Ohio began to formalize those, and in a sense, replace articulation agreements with what we call Ohio Guaranteed Transfer Pathways. That's the OGTP, and they are statewide among public institutions. And it wasn't until that G got in there that I thought we finally made it, because it means guaranteed. It is guaranteed. No, you're not going to talk us through it and get out the transcript and say, well, yeah, it might be your introduction to Shakespeare, but it's not ours. So that and so I think it's really important that we work on those relationships. We're moving back to the other question, because if it is a relationship, it's not between a person and a piece of paper. It's between faculty, it's between institutions, people. And that's why it's called a relationship, rather than, that's when it becomes most effective. So I could go on for another 15 minutes, but you'll be back. No, I won't. So
that's huge. Thank you, Allison, and thank you. This is an excellent, I know that there's much more we could say about this in a large group, but this is an excellent segue to our small group conversations. Thank you to our panelists. I appreciate your contributions and your being here, and invite you to stay on to join a small group conversation. If you have the time, and share your expertise and just your reflections in those smaller groups. So we are moving to our discipline dialogue section. Erica will open up the breakout rooms, and you will get a chance to select the one that you corresponds to the discipline that you feel more affiliated with. I know a number of people teach in more than one discipline. You could take a look too. I mean, if one group has fewer people, it might be worthwhile to move into that group. But kind of some things to think about, and you may be able to bring up somebody could bring up the Michigan Transfer Network, or maybe your college website, or things to think about, like what would it be like to take a transfer tour if you were a learner who is expecting to transfer. How would you find out if you're like in the theater department or in interested in majoring in communications, how would you find out about transfer information? Check the MTN, if you have picked out those courses that you're going to work on, or if you have not yet as a discipline picked those courses, what equivalencies are there, and most importantly, what are the next steps that you want to do? Now, I know that one of the things that we're struggling with in this kind of work that we are trying to do in Michigan is, and partly it's because we're all virtual, and partly it's because this is a different kind of project. We don't have a whole bunch of representation. So we have, now on this call, we have 30 people who are interested in making this work. And I will remind you, one of the deliverables from this project is, for each discipline, we will create a roadmap that will talk about what steps would be needed to strengthen pathways to students. So even though there's only a few of you and you might feel like the dominant element in your conversation is the people who are not in the room and the relationships that are not developed, I would encourage you to make use of the time to talk to each other about what steps then could you take. How can we help support you in recruiting more people into this conversation? How can you, where can you find your partners and bring them into the conversation? So don't give up just because there's just a few of you, because we're gonna use this work that we've been doing and hopefully leverage it for more and broader conversations going forward. This is not something we're going to accomplish in the sort of more or less 18 months to 2 years that we have with this project. So please stick with us. Join your partners. Take a quick bio break if you need to. You don't need to come back to this room. When you are done in your breakout rooms, please, excuse yourselves as you need to, but please, before you do, pick one group member who will email me to just kind of briefly recap what your discussion was, and courses that you've selected to focus on if you have not already communicated that to me, and the next steps. So if you would send those to me in an email, somebody from each, I will look forward to receiving 4 substantive emails in the next few days. And otherwise, I might pop into the rooms to see how it's going. But otherwise, I will wish you a happy rest of your Friday afternoon. And I hope your conversations are very positive. And Erica, if you would open the breakout rooms, there we go. You should be able to pick